Thank you. Boy, we are out of sync here. That was my fault, that delay. We will now call the Plan Commission of May 25th, 2021 to order. Roll call, please.
Sullivan here.
Grillo here.
Clark here.
Kavich here.
Guzikowski here. Oldani here.
Seifert here.
Is Commissioner Chandler with us?
Chandler here.
Seen her before.
I don't hear her. I do see her, but I don't hear her.
Chandler here.
She's not muted either. She said Chandler here.
Okay. Thank you very much. That will get us to approval of the minutes of May 11th, 2021. I hope everybody used their delay time wisely and read all those minutes. But if there's any questions, corrections, or discussion, please speak up. If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Seifert moves to approve the minutes of May 11th, 2021.
Guzikowski will second.
Roll call.
Sullivan, yea.
Grillo, aye.
Clark abstains.
Kavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye. Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler
I
abstains.
don't know if Commissioner Chandler, I can't remember if she was with us or, well, I guess it'll say right in the minutes.
Chandler abstains.
Chandler was excused.
Chandler abstains. She was not at the meeting.
Okay, thank you. That will get us to significant common council actions. Carrie, if you would.
Council approved the following: an ordinance approving a conditional use permit for freight yard, freight terminal, transshipment depot facilities for the property at 150 West Oakwood Parkway, and an ordinance approving a conditional use permit for freight yard, freight terminal, transshipment depot facilities for the property at 10551 South Oakview Parkway. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Item 6A under new business is a zoning text amendment to review a proposed amendment to Chapter 17 concerning traditional neighborhood development districts. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I could get my screen to project, please. While we're waiting for the screen to come up, there we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Carrie, we went over Board of Housing and Zoning Appeal actions.
Yes, there were none.
Thank you. Okay, carry on.
Okay. So we are here to discuss a zoning text amendment for an existing portion of Chapter 17, specifically Section 17.0327. And this is in regards to traditional neighborhood developments. This is a section of code that has not really been utilized to its fullest potential in the past. So what we are doing is kind of establishing some more standards for it. It was a requirement for to include this in our code per statute as part of the Wisconsin planning law. That was included in Chapter 17 in 2001. So before you, excuse me, before you is a proposal for inclusion for some standards, kind of beefs this section up a little bit. We did utilize the model ordinance that was referenced in code. It is still relevant. We also utilized an existing traditional neighborhood development code from a sister city. We utilized Green Bay as kind of a guide for us. Proposed amendments for this particular section of code. We want to establish the intent of the traditional neighborhood development planned unit development. This is already in the planned unit development overlay section. The reason that we say establish the intent is because it is a rather short section right now that references statute and it references that model ordinance. So we want to just make sure that everybody is understanding why we have traditional neighborhood developments and why they require plan unit developments. So we also reference what the required review processes are going to be. Basically, people are going to be requesting a rezone to the traditional neighborhood development, and it will also require a plan unit development. These are not two separate things. They will be required to be in tandem. It's not something that we haven't seen before. Normally, whenever we see a plan unit development, we do see a rezoning that is coupled with it. You have in your packets a draft, and I would welcome any comments or questions, but there are a couple of sections that I'd like to highlight and ask the Plan Commission to specifically provide their input regarding. Once we get past the submission requirements and the kind of overview of the process, the standards begin on page 5 of 13. And the first area that we want to provide some or gain some feedback regarding is the density in the permitted residential uses. As the Plan Commission is aware, we are anticipating a development on the lakefront just west of the existing Lake Vista Park. So using that information, we did come up with some of these minimum and maximum density requirements. So if there's any questions regarding that, we can certainly discuss it. As part of the traditional neighborhood development plan unit development, we are also going to be requiring certain areas to be identified and incorporated into the overall plan. That includes residential, it includes mixed use, it includes open space areas. So that's why that's broken up into 3 different sections here. There is a density bonus, which is the first time that we've had anything like that in the code. That's proposed for the inclusion and the encouragement to include affordable housing units or workforce housing. Within that density bonus is a minimum of 10% requirement for those units to be incorporated, and you are allowed up to an additional 10% over the maximum density if you do meet those criteria. If we wish to incorporate more criteria for that specific density bonus, we can certainly discuss that as well. Moving on, we also have a maximum non-residential area that is proposed. That is on page 6 of 13. That would be section B7. That is stating that 25% is the maximum gross acreage that can be established for non-residential development. The rest of this would be considered residential and residential related. If that is concerning, we can certainly discuss what an appropriate percentage would be. Likewise, there is a minimum requirement for 25% of the open space requirement, which would be 30% for the PUD. 25% of that 30% would be required to be common open space, common for the residents or common for the public. Turning to page 7, under dimensional standards, we do have a change here. In discussing the block and lot size diversity requirement, staff determined that, as proposed, the street layouts, the sentence that begins, the street layouts should provide for perimeter blocks that are generally in the range of 200 to 400 feet deep by 400 to 800 feet long, is a little too proscriptive. It doesn't allow for some of the block groups that we are anticipating. And it doesn't allow for kind of, I guess, unique circumstances or topography. So what we are proposing is to take that specific sentence out and leave a variety of lot sizes continuing. In the chart on page 8 are the dimensional standards. This is the minimum and minimum lot size, minimum lot width, setbacks, and maximum height. There are several notes below this that kind of give some caveats and some considerations for specific portions of this dimensional standards table. And the reason that we included these is because we recognize that with the layout and the developments that are anticipated, there may be some situations where we have to clarify exactly what is going to be required. And this attempts to get at those situations and provide some clarity up front.
I have a question with the chart
Yes.
dealing with multifamily, and this is for the fire department. We have a height of 5 stories or 75 feet. I'm wondering what the size of our ladder truck is at the fire department. Can they reach that height? Can we get an answer from the fire department?
Good evening, Commissioners. Assistant Chief Mike Havey. So our aerial ladder truck is 100-foot aerial length. The approach, or we look at collapse zones of where we can actually reach a distance. So, at this point, that is the maximum reach of our truck is 100 feet.
Okay. So we can reach that distance that we have specified of 75 feet.
Yeah, we haven't seen the building designs yet, so, with landscaping or things of that, in general, yeah, we can reach 100 feet.
Normally, it used to be just 4 stories high, but I see 5 feet here. 5 stories high. So, thank you.
Sure.
Also keep in mind that these maximum heights and stories are in unique circumstances. They would definitely require the Plan Commission to review those designs to ensure that those heights and the number of stories is appropriate for the actual development. This is the maximum that could ever be allowed. It's not necessarily the maximum that will always be approved. Are there any further questions on that?
No, but as long as we're asking some questions along the way. Underneath the table 20, item C, for a single-family detached dwelling, minimum side yard setback of 3 feet shall be provided on one side of the lot line, and a minimum side setback of 5 feet is on the opposite side to side. So potentially, we could have 6 feet between homes?
Yes.
Or
Well, you could have 10 feet between homes
you could if it was 5 and 5.
if it was 5 and 5.
But typically, we're 10
About
feet
8.
off a line now. From fire's perspective, do we limit stories when we're that close? We're kind of getting back to,
So single-family detached and single-family attached, all the way up to 3 to 4 units, are limited to a maximum of 2.5 stories or 35 feet.
building to building.
It could be.
It exists in other parts of the area. I get it. Just different for us. But I understand why.
So within the PUD standards, we also established some exterior building materials. This is in line with what we are proposing for the zoning code update overall, and it also takes into consideration some information that we are anticipating as forthcoming as part of that lakefront development. We do also have a portion that discusses the commercial and mixed-use building ground floor glazing requirement. You may know this a little bit more intimately when we're talking about Drexel Town Square standards. So what this is stating is for those mixed-use or purely commercial buildings, which we're not anticipating that more than 25% of the overall development would be devoted to such types of buildings. That ground floor would have some clear glass requirements. This is stating that the minimum would be 30%. However, recognizing that there are certain situations where that might not always be feasible, we are going to be taking Drexel Town Square as a guide. We do allow within Drexel Town Square some reduction for the incorporation of kind of alternate treatments to make up for that modification. So that section is actually anticipated to be a little bit modified to explain further what the criteria would be in order to reduce that minimum glazing requirement. And it would only be allowed for a maximum request of 50%. So in other words, somebody could ask for 15% glazing, and that would be the most that they would be able to obtain for a modification request if they meet certain criteria. If the Plan Commission feels that that is not going to be acceptable based on the development, you do not have to approve of a modification. The Plan Commission can state that the minimum would have to be more than that, or whatever the circumstance may be, excuse me.
Harry, you said that that would be clear, so we're not talking anything that would be opaque. Like we ran into Drexel Town Square where people wanted to frost the windows because of a certain medical procedure going on or anything like that.
That would be a modification request, and that would be part of what would be established by the criteria. So anybody requesting a modification up to 50% would have to meet certain standards. They would have to basically compensate for the reduction by either, let's say, increasing the types of building materials on the proposed building to be more brick, stone, what have you, increase the landscaping, provide additional amenities within that certain area.
But if it's a tenant spot and it's built a spec and then rent it and just, for instance, say a medical clinic or dental office came in, similar, and they wanted the area, they would have to do interior modifications to block that view?
It depends. It may be that the design of the building would anticipate that, but there would be criteria that would allow for an individual tenant to request a reduction as well. Now, that reduction is not going to be based on tenant space, however. If we do need to incorporate a minimum establishment for a tenant space, that would probably be established by the PUD standards as well. And I should clarify that even though we have these code requirements that we're talking about here, there is going to be planned unit development conditions and restrictions that would go along with this. So whenever somebody proposes a TND, PUD, all of our acronyms, we would still have conditions and restrictions that would get at all of this. So if they ask for a modification at that time, we can certainly say, well, you're proposing this type of building and you want to have 20%. At that time, we can say, okay, if you reduce it any further for specific tenant spaces, you have to meet X, Y, and Z, or come back to the Plan Commission.
I get it. I'm probably being too technical about it. We don't want to be that tight on it right from the get, because we don't know what's going to be there.
Yeah, and that's perfectly acceptable to ask, because it is a little bit difficult to get your brain wrapped around. We have the code requirements, and then we have the PUD that would come as part of the code requirements. Okay. So it's kind of two separate documents that we would be looking at.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Finally, we have some master lighting, landscaping, and sign plan requirements for the development, establishing that those lighting, landscaping, and sign plans would have to be approved as part of a master plan. That would probably be part of the PUD itself, but it would be required to be approved by the Plan Commission. The last area that we are asking for specific input from the Plan Commission is regarding street trees. Currently, as written, it is one for every 50 to 80 feet of frontage. However, if the Plan Commission determines that one or the other, or somewhere in between, might be more appropriate, that's what we're asking for. And if there are any other questions or comments, we can certainly have a discussion about this. I realize that this is something that is quite new. We haven't had a text amendment overhaul quite like this yet. The last district that we established was the LM1 district, and that was already 4 to 5 years ago. There is a suggested motion for approval on the screen. We do have members of the Lakefront Development Team that are here to answer any questions if you have anything specific to that. Keep in mind that we did try and incorporate some of those development elements into the code itself, anticipating that development. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Commissioners, a lot to take in, but any questions you came across in your reading?
No, the only question I have is talking about the street trees. the type of trees that we have. Some of these trees really do a lot of shedding with their seeds, and they leave a lot onto the streets and hard to clean.
I would agree. I just had a phone call about that today. I got to answer. And again, that's something to take up with our Department of Public Works and our forester to be more conscious of that.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to get at. Is
Yeah.
Think about the types of trees that we want to put along the roadside. Because we have the one that's got these long seeds and pods.
Yeah, I got one of them in my area too that a lady complains
And,
about.
man, I'll tell you, they can sure mess up a street and a yard.
Of course, I was told by the forestry, it only happens every few years. Not
Oh, yeah. Well, stop by my neighborhood.
No, I hear you. No, I know what you mean, Fred.
Yeah.
I field a lot of calls like that. And it's really something we should have a discussion about at that level with our forestry department going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Good point. Don, anything?
Nope, no questions.
Chris?
None for me, thank you.
Greg?
Don't have any questions, thank you.
Dawn?
No, not for me.
Matt?
I only have a few, more comments than anything. As far as the street tree spacing, I think that has to coincide and work with the lighting. We shouldn't be putting a standard of 50 or 75 feet when we typically don't know how our lighting's going to go. They should kind of marry with each other.
I would agree, and aesthetically, if, the blocks are going to be 800 foot, depending on the tree that goes in there.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think that your mic is picking you up.
No, and also the street length's going to change too. So that can affect where the trees go. And
So the wording here says that they may be clustered and need not be evenly spaced. Should it be more an average, one tree for every average number of feet?
I would put it in there to give the greatest design options, so to speak. So as you said, if it does turn into a cluster.
I'd be fine with that.
Okay. Is there, should we say average of 80 or is?
I think that's going to get closer to the typical lighting that you're going to see in these type of developments. The spacing we've been seeing lately has been 80 to 100 feet, and it depends on if we're alternating or not. So
Okay.
I think that would give us the flexibility to work with our developers. As far as the setbacks, we do have concerns, obviously, with the minimum setbacks of 3 and 2 feet and things along those natures, just for drainage purposes between homes and maintenance. So I guess it's more of a comment. We do have a current development on right now that I believe is 5 feet between the homes or between the lot line, so 10 feet. And they're very steep slopes.
It's very tight. When you
Yes.
do go through there visually, it's very tight.
So I guess that's more of a concern on the engineering aspect. Other than that, nothing.
Okay. Commissioner Chandler? Anything?
Commissioner Chandler has entered into the chat room that she has no questions.
Okay, thank you. I do not. I kind of asked my one question. I might have marked off one other thing that probably confused me more than anything.
Mr. Mayor, I did neglect to say that there is a clarification that was added after the plan commissioners received their packets regarding size of accessory buildings. What we want to clarify is that the size of the allowed accessory buildings, and really what I'm looking at is on page 7 of 13C, standards for garages specifically, the total of all accessory buildings lot, and it says including detached garages. We want to make sure that we include attached garages as well. Essentially what we want to say here is that the principal dwelling is the principal building. We don't want to, and this isn't something that's going to be proposed that we're anticipating, but essentially what we're trying to say is that the garage should be subordinate to the dwelling.
You know where my question was? Page 6 of 13, number 7, maximum non-residential area. And you have it at 25% of the gross acreage of the typical, what's NDT?
Traditional neighborhood development.
So we'll just throw it out there at the lake. Let's say we do that in phases. Is it 25% of each phase, or is it the total thing?
Or the PUD.
Or the
whole
PUD. It'd be the entire PUD that's spelled out, because you'll show
Right.
all the phases. Okay, thank you. You made that very clear.
Yes, so that's actually one of the requirements to include. If the phasing plan is requested, it has to be provided as part of the PUD request.
Okay. Before we go to a vote, Assistant Chief Havey, do you have any comments from fire on any of these? I don't know if you had a chance to go through it all, but in the end, we're going to build this stuff and you're going to deal with it.
Good evening again, Assistant Chief Mike Havey with Fire. We just had a short little review, and typically some of the questions that were already answered. I think we don't have any concerns at this point with the proposal.
And just while I have them here, I mean, with, the building, we talked about building heights and setbacks and for drainage, but when the buildings are getting that tight, we don't require sprinkling unless they're over 4 stories, correct?
It's kind of based on the occupancy classification, so the residential is not required.
Okay.
If
Is that something we should look at in our PUDs going forward? Just an opinion, don't need an answer.
I would not be comfortable providing an answer on that right now. I'm not sure that we would have a whole lot of support if there's no fire code requirement to kind of fall back on.
There isn't statewide, but
Yeah,
best practice would probably tell you to do it.
Obviously, the fire prevention, we advocate for sprinklers in every structure.
Yeah.
However, the code that we can rely on is the state adopted NFPA 1 to 2012 edition, which does not require the suppression systems in those type of structures. However, we would obviously advocate for sprinklers at any building or occupancy opportunity, but we really have to fall back on what the required code would allow us to do.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I hope I was able to answer that.
Anybody? Well, no.
Okay.
Nothing, Mike. Thank you. Okay. There's no further discussions, questions?
Well, I would actually
Carrie?
like to specifically ask the Plan Commission to look at a couple of things. Under the permitted residential uses in that table, under 1 on page 5 of 13, that's getting at the maximum and minimum densities. I want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with what we're proposing here. If there are any questions or concerns, this would be the time to express them.
I guess I'd trust your expertise of the staff on that one.
You will note that there are 2 categories that have 2 numbers next to them. The first is for the maximum density for 3 to 4 units. We are proposing that to be a maximum of 12. And for the multifamily or senior housing, there is a 97 or a 102. The 102 is based on that maximum of 5 stories. The 97 was based off of a different number that was kind of in line with what we are anticipating for a development along the lakefront. If there are no concerns with the 102, that is what is being proposed. If you prefer the lower number, we can certainly go with that as well.
Yeah, and I'd defer to staff on that and their expertise.
I did not hear any concerns regarding that 25% of the gross acreage being allowed for the non-residential component. Everybody's good with 25% of gross?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Chandler is asking if there is a way to share the 102 that includes 5 stories. 102, Commissioner Chandler, would be the maximum allowed, and if the maximum allowed is 5 stories, they would have to make that work within that. Were there any concerns regarding the clear glazing requirement and how staff is proposing to kind of get at those certain situations where the 30% might not be applicable?
No, I think lessons learned from Drexel Town Square, I think staff has put some thought into this and made it flexible and workable for developers and applicants.
So we will be establishing some additional text and criteria to kind of get at that exact well, can't say exact, that kind of scenario where they would be asking for a reduction and under what criteria that would be allowed. We may actually establish tiers so that you would have to do a certain amount within that category, not specifying that you have to do X, Y, and Z, but something within that category to get a certain percentage. That would be presented for Common Council approval. It's an idea. It may not make it into the text, but that was something that we were thinking about. Commissioner Chandler has entered into the chat. Is it possible that they can have 102 in less than 5 stories? They being a potential builder. Everything would have to come before the Plan Commission to be approved as part of the plan unit development, and it would also have to come back for site and building plan review for those kinds of buildings. If the Plan Commission determines on that application that a 5-story building or 102 units, and that's per acre, is not appropriate given the context of the development, that would be at the Plan Commission's discretion. And of course, we are going to be addressing some of these scenarios within the plan unit development standards as well. So this is just establishing the maximum that could possibly be developed under a traditional neighborhood development PUD. It doesn't mean that everybody is going to be getting the maximum. It's all contextual.
Makes sense. Yep.
Commissioner Chandler is asking, should we identify the sides of the building which require glazing to acquire the 30%? It's actually established as being the street-facing side of the ground floor of such buildings.
Is that it for you, Carrie, or did you want to bring something else to our attention besides the glazing and the...
No, I think if the Plan Commission is satisfied with what's being proposed, then I would be comfortable moving forward.
Okay. Could you put up the proposed motion again, please? That is our suggested motion. Somebody like to make it?
Guzikowski makes a motion that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council, that the proposed amendments to section 17.0327 of the Municipal Code pertaining to the traditional neighborhood development PUD district are approved after a public hearing.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, starting with Commissioner Carrillo.
Carrillo, aye.
Clark, aye.
Bekavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Ladani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
And Commissioner Chandler?
Chandler has voted aye.
Okay.
Sullivan, aye.
Thank you. That gets us to item 6B, and that's plan review for site building and related plans for Oak Creek Dental for an addition to the existing building on the property at 8725 South Howell. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an addition request for an existing building. It used to be a dental office, and actually it's proposed to remain a dental office. The addition will allow for an expansion of the office space as well as for the expansion of exam rooms. This is currently in the B4 district. The 630 square foot addition is proposed to the west side of the building, so it will likely not be seen from Howell Avenue. This is for Oak Creek Dental Care. They are proposing to move their offices from their current location in the multi-tenant commercial building on Drexel and Howell. Full disclosure, this is my dentist's office. If there are any concerns with my providing this information, please speak now. Thank you. On the screen right now is the existing site plan. You'll see that the building is situated about 30 feet from Howell Avenue, a little bit less than 30 feet from Howell Avenue, with parking on the south and to the west. The proposal, again, is for the 630 square foot addition to the west side of the building. It does show that there would be a reduction in the total parking stalls provided. However, they are maintaining 19 parking stalls. Code requires 5 stalls for every doctor plus 1 for every peak shift employee. That would require 17. So they're exceeding the minimum requirement by 2. You'll also note that in the southwest corner of the parking area, there is a dumpster enclosure proposed. And this is a bit of an update from what was included in the staff report and packet. They have updated the enclosure materials to be brick veneer to match the building. So thank you very much to the applicant and the consultants for working together to meet that requirement. On the screen right now is the proposed landscape plan. Most of the landscaping will be maintained as is, and there will be additional landscaping surrounding that proposed addition on the west and around the dumpster enclosure. And these were the plans that were provided to you just prior to the meeting, showing the update to that trash enclosure. On the screen right now is the proposed floor plan showing what the addition would incorporate. And as we turn to the elevations, we'll talk more about the building materials. They are proposing vinyl siding as the main exterior building material, which is not actually listed as an acceptable primary building material. However, Section 17.1009 sub A24 gives discretion to the Plan Commission to adjust the exterior building materials that are allowed based on an addition. So they already have vinyl siding incorporated into the overall main materials for this building. The addition, if the Plan Commission wishes to approve the addition as proposed, they could make a modification to allow for such. This is the east elevation as seen from Howell Avenue currently. No changes proposed to this elevation. Again, incorporating the vinyl siding and architectural shingles to match the existing on the south. And on the west, which again will not be seen from the road. And if there are any questions, this suggested motion is updated from your packets, removing conditions 2 and 4 as they've been met with the updated plans. Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you, Carrie. Applicant, anybody like to speak on behalf? Want to say anything or wait for questions from commission? If the applicant's with us.
I'm Russell Raposa, architect for the project. Again, as Carrie, 12690 West Greenbrier Lane, New Berlin, Wisconsin. Again, as Carrie has addressed, it's a very simple addition to the building. He's looking to add more treatment rooms. We tried to be contextual with the addition to the building, matching it as best as possible. And again, as far as the finishes, if we went away from the vinyl on that into the building, it wouldn't tie in as well, go into something that would work. So that's really the only thing that we'd be looking to change from, what the ordinance calls for, so.
Thank you very much. Stand by if there's some questions. We'll start with Commissioner Chandler. Anything?
Yes, Commissioner Chandler has mentioned that she has no questions at this time.
Okay. Fred?
No questions at this time.
Don?
I don't have any questions for the applicant, only for Carrie. Is there any action we need to take to approve the vinyl siding? I don't have a problem with it.
Just needs 3/4 majority approval.
Okay, as the motion is? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
I had no problems with this either. It's also my dentist as well, so.
Greg?
No questions, and I have no issues with the vinyl.
Okay. Dawn?
Nothing for me.
Matt?
Nothing, thank you.
No, I have nothing either, and quite frankly, I agree with the architect. The existing building already has it. I think it should match, or it kind of looks out of place a little bit. So, excellent. If there's no other discussions or questions, motion, please.
Seifert moves that the planning commission approves a site and building plans submitted by Dr. Saliki, Oak Creek Dental, for the property at 8725 South Howell Avenue with the following conditions. 1, that all relevant code requirements remain in effect. 2, that the landscaping plans are revised.
Commissioner?
2 and 4. We struck 2 and 4, I'm sorry.
Yes, if you look at your screen,
Okay, I didn't see it on the screen.
Okay. So conditions 2 and 4 in your packet would be stricken as they've been fulfilled by the revised plans.
Okay, now it's on. I'm sorry, I didn't see it before.
You're good.
All right,
We'll deal with you later.
can we continue then? No.
So we've got condition 1. Condition 2 would be
Okay,
that the plans are
condition 2
revised.
Is that the plans are revised to include locations and screening for any new mechanical equipment, transformers, and utilities if applicable. And 3, that all detailed revised plans are submitted in digital format to the Department of Community Development prior to submission of permit applications.
Hold on 8 seconds.
Roll call, starting with Alderman Lark.
Clark, aye.
Bukovic, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Hold on, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That will now get us to item 6C, and that is a plan review of site building and related plans from Milwaukee Area Technical College for amendments to the existing baseball fields and dugouts at 6665 South Howell. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This should be a fun one to talk about. They have an existing baseball field. For those of you who are not familiar, it's kind of on the southwest corner of the property, in between kind of their fire area and the building.
In their new solar fields.
And
coming up.
well, the new solar fields are a little bit kitty corner from that. The proposal is for modifications to include synthetic turf, which is not part of the Plan Commission's review tonight, but it is part of the overall plan, so that's why it's included. Lighting for the field, new dugouts, and potential within an alternate situation for bullpens and batting cage scenario, as well as associated fencing for these proposed structures and also the baseline. So again, here's the location of the existing field in relation to the buildings, the fire tower structure, et cetera. This site plan is showing the existing layout of the field, which overall is not going to change. However, there are 2 scenarios that we're going to be talking about. The base would include, modifying the existing turf to synthetic for the infield. It would also include the, basically a 50.5 by 10 visitor team dugout, which we will talk about the building materials in a bit. A 60.5 by 10 foot home team dugout, which would be on the third baseline. That would incorporate a storage room into the overall architecture as well, and then an 8-foot tall chain link fence for the foul line and for the outfield. The alternate would incorporate everything that I just talked about, plus an 86 by 28 visitor bullpen, and a 100 by 57 combination bullpen batting cage, which would be it's shown on the southeast portion of the field. Not really great with exactly how you would describe where that location is, and those who are more familiar with the exact parts of the ball field will help me out. Left field, thank you. Okay, that's where it is. Both of these scenarios would also incorporate the extension of some concrete walkways to access both of these structures, and again, the associated fencing. Should mention, however, that the fencing in most of these scenarios, with some exceptions, would be black vinyl coated chain link fence. So the dugouts themselves are going to be, constructed of painted CMU block. They do incorporate a little bit of hardy vertical siding and batten boards, dimensional shingles for that slanted roof, and of course the black vinyl coated chain link fence. There's also, here's the third base dugout. Basically looks exactly the same. Excuse me. There is a future building shown on the plans themselves. It's not part of this review. That would come back to the Plan Commission at the time that it was proposed. Within the narrative that was submitted, they also mentioned that they are upgrading a sound system, and staff has mentioned in the report that if there are any upgrades required for the existing scoreboards, or if new scoreboards are going to be required outside of just the sound system upgrade, that may need Plan Commission approval as well. And lighting, excuse me, the field is not currently lit, so they are proposing some lighting for the field itself. The lighting package is still out for bid, so there might be some changes to that, but the dugouts themselves would have wall packs on the exterior as well as ceiling lights. And there is a suggested motion for approval for Plan Commission consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Before we go to the council, anybody wishing to speak? Applicant, anybody?
Good evening. I'm Dan Rairdons, engineer and designer of the project, 6049 South New York Avenue, Cudahy, Wisconsin. And Carrie did a good job of describing the project. If there's any questions, I can certainly field them. Maybe the one thing to point out with the dugouts, we're putting them back in pretty much the way they are. Right now they are painted CMU, dimensional shingle, asphalt roof, and then the hardy board trim and fascia on the front.
Great. We'll go to the commission. Matt, you're a baseball guy. Anything from you?
I have no comments.
Dawn?
I'm familiar with this project. I remember there always being a lot of mud. Is that why they're putting in the asphalt?
Oh, the synthetic turf.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely the reason behind the synthetic turf, that they'll be able to play on it, as soon as the snow melts in the spring. Currently, baseball fields are relatively flat, so it's really into May before it really dries up. And so, yeah, it's, get a lot more use with the synthetic turf. It's ready to go first thing in the spring, and of course, baseball seasons
Right.
in the spring. So
drainage problems out there, and they wouldn't be able to use it till way past the start of the season. And the dugouts are there still, right? You're just replacing them?
Correct. The existing dugouts actually project into the baseball field, that 10 feet. We're literally just pushing them back 10 feet, so they're out of the the follow line fencing will just come straight right back behind home plate. So we're pushing the dugouts back 10 feet, but other than that, they're pretty much exactly in the same spot.
Thank you.
Greg?
No concerns. I'm just curious with the alternates, the bullpens. Are those included or is that a different option?
The intent with the alternates is over the course of 2 years, we're going to build everything. Just from a funding standpoint, maybe we have to do the infield this year, and then next year do the outfield and the bullpens and the dugout. And
Okay, understood.
or actually, this year we'll do the infield and the dugout and hopefully everything. But if we have to push something to next year, the outfield and the bullpen and batting cage would be next year. But the intent is to do the whole project over the course of 2 years.
Yeah, no concerns.
Chris?
I have no questions. All of them were answered.
Don?
No questions.
Fred?
No questions at this time. It looks good.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Commissioner Chandler has 2 questions. One, will the dugout locations be above ground or partially below?
The dugouts will be at grade, so that the floor of the dugout is at grade. They aren't below grade at all.
Okay. And if my screen could be shared again, please? Commissioner Chandler is asking for details on the storage room location and purpose. It is part of the home team third base dugout building. The purpose for the storage room in this dugout, though, if you could elaborate.
Oh, sure. It's, storage of baseball equipment, bats, balls, helmets, things of that nature, kind of incidental to baseball. We're not looking at storing, lawnmowers. Well, you wouldn't need it on the synthetic turf, but, it's just materials or items for baseball use.
Carrie?
Commissioner Chandler is asking, why is synthetic turf being proposed?
The client, currently the natural grass, again, is very wet in the spring. Obviously, baseball fields need to be built fairly flat so that the outfield fence isn't 3 feet below home plate. And so anyway, the synthetic turf will allow for use, right away in March versus right now, MATC does have to reschedule a fair number of their games that are in March because the field's just too wet to play on. So they want to have a field that they can play on as much as they want.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have no questions. They've all been answered. Thank you very much. If there's no further discussion, motion.
Clark moves that the Plan Commission approve site and building plans submitted by Ray Zukaukas, MATC, for the property at 6665 South Howell Avenue with the following conditions. Number 1, that all relevant code requirements will remain in effect. And number 2, that all detailed revised plans are submitted in digital format to the Department of Community Development prior to submission of permit applications.
Guzikowski will second.
Roll call, starting with myself. Aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Goldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Clark, aye.
Okay, great. Good luck, everybody. Have a good season. That will get us to item 6D, and that is review of a certified surveying map combining the properties at 9925 South Stern Street and 9955 South 13th Street. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a proposal to combine the 2 properties mentioned. This is part of the Creekside Corporate Park, which is in part of a PUD. The combination is in anticipation of constructing a multi-tenant industrial building, which will be reviewed in the next agenda item. On the screen is the proposed CSM combining those 2 properties. You'll note that there is a rather large utility easement that is in the middle of this property. The suggestion from staff in the report is that the utility easement note be modified to remove the reference to being released and re-recorded. The reason for changing that notation is because it hasn't been done yet. And having a notation on the certified survey map without a reference to an actual recorded document is just not helpful. It's also showing the existing conditions out there until they're changed. So this would be just something that would reduce confusion overall and reflect existing conditions. Post-combination, this would exceed the minimum district requirements and would be in conformance with all dimensional standards. There is a suggested motion for approval on the screen for Plan Commission consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Mr. Faber, would you like to wait for questions or anything you want to come up?
Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Mike Faber with our ownership entity for this site, Creek 2 Land LLC, N17W24222 Riverwood Drive, Waukesha 53188. We're in agreement with the staff recommendation on the CSM, so no issues. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Start, Matt.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Don? Craig?
No questions.
Chris?
Light manufacturing, it kind of gives me heartburn for the neighbors that are right next to this area. And I'm sure some of them are a bit concerned as well. So I just was wondering what type of light manufacturing you're considering.
Alderman Guzikowski, we don't have any users at this time.
Okay.
So any tenants that we can attract, we have not yet made a determination about whether we will build the building speculatively, leaning in that direction, but no decision yet. But if it would be to attract a lead tenant before we start construction, having the building fully approved and, if you will, teed up and ready to go is very helpful. Businesses frequently lean towards taking shorter and shorter amounts of time, and if you're not ready to go, they'll go to an existing building. As to light manufacturing itself, what you'll see in the next item is that the building is oriented so that the industrial side, the dock side, is 100% to the north, with the office-y side and autos only on the south side. That site has, as you are aware, a very significant berm with very mature landscaping, has been there for close to 20 years. And we would only contemplate, at least without coming back to the Plan Commission, things that are already currently allowed under the M1 PUD that is applied to the entire park there.
Hey, Chris? Don?
No questions.
Fred?
Yeah, I have a question about the easement. They're rearranging the easements that you have originally. Where are they going, or how are they being laid out on the new layout?
We've had discussion with the utility and engineering staff about that. Our plan will be to eliminate most of that easement and abandon the utilities that are currently there. Originally, this park was contemplated to have a road that looped all the way back out, and that's why the utilities are in that spot. But our engineers have evaluated that, and what will happen is that they will stop for sanitary at the property as it comes in from the cul-de-sac on the north side. The water will be looped out and around to the south of the building so that it maintains its way back out to 13th Street, but simply removed out of the footprint of where the building will go.
Actually be around the outside of the building.
For the water, yes.
Water. Okay. Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, Commissioner Chandler?
Commissioner Chandler has stated that she has no questions at this time.
Okay. I myself don't. Certified survey map, and Fred, you covered the easements, so I'm okay.
Good.
with that, I guess we are ready for motion.
Seifert moves that the planning commission recommends to the common council that the certified survey map submitted by Mike Faber, Creek 2 Land LLC for the properties at 9955 South 13th Street and 9925 South Stern Street be approved with the following conditions. One, that the note regarding release of existing utility easements is removed from the map prior to recording. Two, that all technical corrections, including but not limited to spelling errors, minor coordinate geometry corrections, and corrections required for the compliance with the municipal code and Wisconsin statutes are made prior to recording.
Hold on any seconds.
Roll call, starting with Chris.
Guzikowski, aye.
Hold on, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Warwick, aye.
David, aye. And that will get us to item E, which is review site building and related plans for multi-tenant industrial building on the properties at 9925 South Stern Street and 9955 South 13th. Carrie, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is talking about the proposed development for those two properties that we just talked about for the certified survey map. The proposal is for a 191,406 roughly square foot multi-tenant industrial spec building. No tenants, as Mr. Faber stated, have been confirmed at this time. It is part of the Creekside Corporate Park PUD. Those conditions and restrictions have been included as part of your packets for consideration and reference. So the first thing that we want to discuss tonight is the stormwater. The stormwater has been designed for the park itself in accordance with MMSD and city requirements. The MMSD approval has considered development within the park to be grandfathered as long as it does not include any additional changes, and that was a condition of that approval. As presented, these plans include changes to that approved stormwater master plan that are not currently in conformance with those requirements. We have not yet received a plan that has been presented for compliance with these requirements, although city staff is working with the consultants on this issue at the moment. This issue is essential to the development and must be resolved prior to any development, and changes to the plans as a result of that stormwater master plan, the changes for this particular development that may require the plans to come back to the Plan Commission if they are approved tonight for future approval. So the stormwater is critical. It is integral to the development of these two properties. And staff is stating that it must be addressed prior to any development on this property. That's how critical it is. Now, turning from the stormwater to the plans themselves. Site plan is on the screen at the moment. The setbacks, the dimensional standards for the building itself are met with the PUD and with the M1 district. As we do not currently have any information on tenant operations or employees or hours, it's a little bit difficult to determine what the parking requirements would be. We do have, excuse me, access from the private development road to the north, which is shown in that cul-de-sac. And there's also access that is existing, that is shared by specifically Crothall, but is used by the park, that exits onto 13th Street. Loading docks and truck parking are sited on the north, which is interior to the park. There are two drive-in, excuse me, apologies. There are two drive-in doors on either side of the loading dock area, and there are approximately 55 dock areas or spaces for future dock doors. So we are anticipating that all of the truck parking would be on the north. So with regard to parking for the employees and visitors is entirely on the south and the west part of the building. There are 167 stalls shown in that area. There are, I think, 5 stalls that are just south of the cul-de-sac that are also proposed. The plans also include 66 future stalls in the south and on the west. With regard to the PUD requirements, there is a section that states that parking on the south should be oriented such that the drive aisle is located closest to that residential neighborhood, not parking. So that would be something up for Plan Commission consideration as to whether or not the PUD would need to be amended in order to allow for the configuration as shown, particularly for those future parking stalls. And because the employees, the operations, and the hours of operation are going to be tenant specific, it will be up to the management company and or the landlord or the landowner to ensure that there is sufficient parking for all of those tenant needs. With regard to outdoor storage, the only thing that would be allowed and is being requested at this time is for truck parking in the dock area on the north. So there is no outdoor storage component that is being requested. Turning to the landscaping, we're going to be addressing this in 2 sections, the west and the east. Particularly for the west, we are highlighting 2 areas. On the south, which is closest to that residential neighborhood, we have a berm and we have a proposed landscape area that is also a green infrastructure bioswale kind of area. On the north, we are showing the west portion that would partially screen the loading dock area, and there's additional landscaping surrounding that proposed trash enclosure for the development. Some of those landscape elements would also provide some screening for the dock area as well. There are no screen walls proposed as part of this. This is the east side when we are highlighting here the continuation of that berm. The berm is existing, the berm is currently landscaped. The berm is required by the PUD to remain in its current location, and it is required within the PUD, and it's noted in the plans that those existing vegetative elements are to be retained. There is also a note in subsequent portions of the plans that vegetation may be removed from the berm but would be replaced. Within the staff report is a suggestion that any vegetation that is removed specifically with regard to screening elements on the berm, if that is to be replaced, any impacted screening should be replaced in kind for both number and height to the greatest extent possible. And that is for the protection of that screening that has been there for however many years now. On the screen right now is a proposed floor plan. Right now it's a bit of a vacant space, and that's because it will be built to accommodate the tenant's needs. Turning to the elevations, we do have some comments. With regard to the materials, the proposal is to incorporate painted insulated precast concrete panels. So this is a concrete building. We've seen this proposed throughout the city in other developments. The PUD does state that there are acceptable building materials. In the past, the Plan Commission has approved of concrete panels to fulfill those acceptable exterior primary building materials. So this is part of the north elevation, the loading dock area, split into 2 portions. You'll note that there are several items that show as X's. Those are for future loading docks. Turning now to the elevation on the east, this is where we start to have some comments regarding the elevation design itself, or the building design. What is outlined in yellow are proposed to be painted windows. In other words, it's paint on the building. The orange that's highlighted is identified as a future knockout for a window at such time that a tenant space would be identified. We are, as staff, suggesting that all the windows be incorporated now. Whether or not that future knockout window is incorporated, that's something that can be retained as future, I think. But I think that the windows that are highlighted in yellow as being painted should be installed as actual glazing. And these are the comments that staff are proposing for the remainder of the building. Again, all of these are shown as future knockouts for windows. All the tenant spaces, if these are going to be the tenant entrances, should mirror each other. This is something that is a standard that we have required for similar multi-tenant industrial buildings recently in the city. It's something that we are requesting and suggesting as being consistent. The windows should be included. Same for the south and on the west. These are all the yellow items, again, are proposed to be painted windows. We are suggesting that they should all be incorporated within the shell of the building as actual windows. There may be some consideration for that north portion where the yellow, the section of 3 windows are, because that is on the northwest corner near the loading dock area. It's more likely that the office space for the tenants would be near the entrance, which is on the southwest corner. That's where the concentration of the elements should be required. This is the rendering that has been suggested for the southeast corner. Just gives you an idea of what the overall architecture of the building looks like. The 2 highlighted areas are the proposed painted windows that would be seen from the east elevation. We didn't talk about the trash enclosure so much, but that is proposed in the northwest corner. They are going to be precast walls to match the building, and we are expecting those elevations to be incorporated into revised plans. There was nothing incorporated into the plans for rooftop mechanical units except for a note on the plans that says that those are not included in the shell of the building. Those would have to be cited based on tenant needs, and that's typical. What we would require then is when those tenant spaces are built out, those RTUs are cited such that the existing parapets would screen them, and if they are not adequately screened, then they would have to incorporate screening elements to adequately screen those from the street, as approved by either the Plan Commission at your discretion or the Department of Community Development. With regard to lights, we did not incorporate the lighting plan into the slides tonight. What we are requiring as part of the suggested motion is that all lights be shielded, directed downward, that they have a maximum color temperature of 3,500 Kelvin. This is something that we have been incorporating into all other developments of this type that are adjacent to residential neighborhoods, and that they be shielded on the side facing those residential properties to the south. Because this is a potentially multi-tenant industrial building, if they are going to be accommodating more than 2 tenants, we will need a master sign plan. And that would have to be reviewed by the Plan Commission at a future date. That's more informational than anything else, but it's something that is a requirement. Now there is a suggested motion on the screen. There's 2 options. One is that the Plan Commission determined that this should be held pending information regarding the stormwater and the other elements that staff has identified in the staff report. If the Plan Commission is comfortable with proceeding with approval with conditions, we have several that are listed for consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Before we go on to the commission, Mr. Faber's been waiting patiently. I'll let him go, and then if there's any residents.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Planner Bond's description was great. I only have 3 comments about items that we're not in complete agreement with. One of those is simply a request on the stormwater issue. We have been working with the city's stormwater engineer. We're hopeful that we can arrive at a solution that doesn't require us to change everything in the building design and site plan. And we would request that if everything else is comfortable for the Plan Commission, that you approve it subject to the city stormwater engineer approving that plan, and that the planning staff can determine whether any changes would require this approval to come back in front of you. Because we're hopeful that it won't require any changes to the building design and site plan, that you would feel comfortable with the engineering staff approval on its own, and being comfortable that the planning staff would determine whether the building design approval needed to come back in front of the Plan Commission. The second matter has to do with the architectural features on the building. As we have proposed it, with some of the windows being painted, we chose these locations very carefully to be in locations where we don't believe they would be scrutinized and highly visible to people. In fact, we've proposed windows in places that are not typical. For example, on the internal circulation of the park, when you come off the 13th, down Helm, take a left, and go down towards the cul-de-sac, you're facing the dock end of the building. We've proposed actual windows there because that's going to be visible to members of the public and other park occupants. It's not typical to have office windows on the back on the back side, dock side of a building. As we look at the west side of the building, for example, those windows are generally only visible from the freeway, and generally only the top of the building will be visible, because the freeway level is quite a bit below grade from where the building's height is. And this technique of having knockout panels where windows can be added if we end up with tenants who want more and need more office space is very common across the country. It's been successfully used in many places, including in Oak Creek. Those handouts are images of two buildings. One is the most recent building in this park itself, the Crothall Laundry Building, which has 6 or 7 buildings on the east, windows on the east side of the building. But other than the very small little clerestory windows around the top of the building, there are no windows on that building whatsoever. That's our immediate environment. Then the other images are of the very large Amazon building across the street. And all of those windows on the main part of the building, on that Amazon building, are painted on windows. But both the distance and the circumstances of how people would view those is that they would never guess that those were painted windows unless they got up very close to them. So my view is that's very similar to how people going along the freeway at 70 miles an hour will view the west facade here, and also very similar to how people will view our east facade that faces 13th Street, because there's existing berms and landscaping along 13th Street. And so it's only a small opening where our access point comes off 13th that someone would have to be looking at the exact right moment. Instead of paying attention to their driving, they would have to turn their head and look and catch a glimpse as they passed by. Unlike that, even back in the warehouse area on the east facade, when someone comes in off of 13th Street, they're facing what will almost surely be the warehouse area and where a drive-in door is on the north side. We're proposing real windows there because someone will be facing those head-on as they're driving, and that allows someone to look at the facade for a longer period of time, rather than push those real windows into a place that people won't notice and won't see and won't be focused on. There are no parking spaces on the east side of the building, for example. So the few windows that we're proposing to be painted there will be designed structurally to be able to be cut out and add real windows if we end up with a tenant who has enough office space that that's where they want their office space. But especially in this situation where the cost of steel is making these buildings horrifically expensive compared to even 6 months ago. So I'm struggling to, for every $20,000 and $30,000 I can find to try to keep the cost of the building reasonable compared to what market rents are. But also the context of our immediate neighborhood, where this plan commission has approved other buildings that have almost no windows, except in the example of the Amazon building, there's real windows on the small little office pod that's glued onto the front of the building, but the main building itself has none. I would request that the Plan Commission consider and approve the window pattern that we have suggested here, because the ones that we are proposing to be painted on will be very difficult for many people to notice or observe. And if we do end up with heavier office finish, they can be added because they'll be designed in structurally to be able to be added on the building. The last issue that I wanted to comment on that Carrie mentioned was the discrepancy, the conflict in the PUD conditions, the language that asked for the drive aisle to be on the south edge instead of the parking spaces, that appears to be in conflict with the actual approved development plan, which shows a single loaded corridor with parking on both sides. If we accomplished the narrative and pushed the drive aisle to the south, I don't think that's going to accomplish anything positive for the neighborhood. And so our team can't figure out what that is driving at. Community Development Director Seymour offered to try to look through minutes from back when this was passed, and either didn't have the time or couldn't find anything relevant to explain why this narrative made it into the PUD language, but the general development plan conflicts with that and shows it the way we've designed it. If you put the drive aisle to the south and had the 2 rows of parking nose to nose, I can't conceive of how that helps the neighborhood. In fact, the vehicles passing by through the drive lane would be somewhat buffered if the parking row was full of cars. So we're not proposing anything that, in my view, is harmful to the neighborhood. This conflict between the development plan and the language was put in place at the exact same time. It would seem to me to be prudent for the Plan Commission to resolve that question, because if we look at, potentially amending the PUD, it'll be back before you.
Is that it, Mr.
Yes,
Faber?
thank you.
Okay. Any residents? No, we have. You want to come up, Yvonne? Need your name and address, please. Sure. And then whatever questions you got, you can pull the mic down.
Yes, Yvonne Sierra, 1500 West Lois Lane. And just a few things here. I mean, honestly, the plans and all the efforts that your company has gone through, Mike, is phenomenal, very detailed. If you look at the freeway right now, did you notice that we have the berms or the sound barriers are up? So, but they stop at Daniel. So what's happening? There's new grid work on the freeway. Do you realize it's very noisy because of the grid work? And so everything is coming, all the noise is coming from the north now because there's no berm or there's no sound barrier north of Daniel. And honestly, I think his building is going to make things a little quieter is what I'm hoping for. Because how tall is your building? Do you plan it?
About 37 feet.
37 feet high. I mean, we knew there was going to be a building going up there. With the parking, it doesn't appear that there's any semi-traffic coming down on the south side. Is that correct? Okay, so what you have is you have people coming to work, leaving, different shifts. It looks like the parking, some of the parking is proposed only on the south side. Not all of it is yet planned. Is that right?
Yes, some of the parking is only
Mike.
planned to be constructed.
Mike, that mic is on if you want.
Oh,
Yes, some of the parking is planned to be what we call land banked, so only parked and built if it's needed by the density of employees.
right. So as a resident on Lois Lane, I guess, with his proposed tenants, or, I mean, I'd like you all to take into consideration what they do and when they can make noise, because right now, we just got done listening to the pile drivers for the noise thing. So we just got done with that. Was all done at night, and it was just banging all night long. And if no semi-traffic comes down on the south side, I think that will make the people happy on Lois Lane. Your building might be tall enough to keep all of that noise coming through the gateway. Honestly, I think maybe my heating bills will be less because the north wind will. Some good thing. I got to look at some good things, right?
Looking on the positive.
I have to, because you see, that used to be agricultural. It was just a farm, and there was like 3 lanes on the freeway, and it's changed. So my husband wanted me to just make a comment that Michael is a very good person to work with as a business person in that area of development. Thank you.
Great, thank you. There's no one else. I will take it to the commission. Commissioner Chandler to start. How's that?
Commissioner Chandler has asked if I could provide more details about the ordinance conflict with regard to the double-loaded employee parking along the south side of the building. The ordinance is from 2009, and that's the latest amendment. It's been amended several times since the original PUD was brought before the Plan Commission and the Common Council. So the text of the PUD does say, if I can get to that page. For those of you following along, this is section 2E. The southerly parking lot shall be designed so that the aisle is closest to the berm and that no parking spaces directly abut the south property line. The general development plan is showing 2 parcels, the 2 parcels that were just combined, which means that it would show 2 buildings. It is true that for one of the buildings within the general development plan, it shows double-loaded parking on the south. However, the berm is in place, and the berm is current. It's existing. The second parcel in the general development plan shows a building with the orientation such that the loading docks are on the west side of the building. This was something that was never actually proposed. It was a general development, it was a general development plan amendment that was showing this configuration. The prior general development plan, I couldn't even speak to the layout at this point. So there is apparently a conflict between what is shown graphically versus what is written in the text. The intent is for the protection as much as possible for that residential neighborhood to the south. The feeling that a continuous row of parking and a double-loaded parking has more potential impact to the neighbors to the south because the berm does not completely cover the entire south property line. There is a portion where it ends, and that's where the kind of the swale is proposed. And I say swale, that it's kind of still in development. It could be a little bit larger than a swale. It could be more of a stormwater feature, but it is not proposed to be a detention pond at this point.
Rain garden.
So the parking does continue along that side, which in the general development plan is not shown as parking for that second parcel on the west. That's where that conflict comes in. We want to make sure that the neighborhood to the south is protected as much as possible. That's why the requirement is for that berm to be retained and the landscaping to be retained on that berm as much as possible as well. So if that is something that the Plan Commission feels strongly about, that would be something that we would want to clean up in the PUD if the Plan Commission feels that it should go forward that way. Commissioner Chandler, did that answer your question? Yes, she has a question for the applicant. What are the plans to eliminate this conflict within the ordinance?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Carrie?
She's asking for what the plans are to eliminate the conflict within the ordinance. And Commissioner Chandler, if I may, that's up to the Plan Commission to determine whether or not the ordinance should be amended, or if the Plan Commission is satisfied with showing that double row of parking along the entire south property line. And it's staff's contention within the report that the Plan Commission make a determination on this, because our reading of the ordinance is that it shouldn't be allowed. Commissioner Chandler is asking if this item is not revised. Commissioner Chandler, could you elaborate on your question? I think Commissioner Chandler is asking whether or not the applicant has any proposal to eliminate the conflict, meaning is the applicant proposing a clarification? I would defer to the applicant to address that.
Faber?
Commissioner Chandler, my answer would be eliminating the parking would be a pretty severe restriction, because it would limit the kinds of tenants that we would be able to attract to the building and to Oak Creek. And my fear would be it would aim the tenancy more at pure distribution. I think it's both in our interest and in the city's interest to be able to attract users that have a higher proportion of employees. That tends to be either a little more office use, because office use is a little more dense than pure warehouse use. And so the higher the percentage of office use or light assembly or operations that have more employees tend to pay a little better. And I think that's better for the tax base of the city as well as the jobs that are attracted to Oak Creek. We can't push the building any further to the north to make the same quantity of parking, because semi-trucks have a minimum distance that they need for maneuvering at the docks. To my mind, the solution is either for the Plan Commission to be comfortable that the protection of the neighborhood is satisfied by the configuration of the building, which is better in two respects than the general development plan. Number one, the building is continuous, so instead of a gap between two buildings and noise from the back of Crawthall or noise from Stern Street coming into the cul-de-sac, a 37-foot tall building is blocking that noise like a barrier, even better than a landscaped berm. So it's in effect a second layer of protection to the berm. And secondly, the general development plan has approved on a west facade docks, which can transmit noise, trucks idling and so forth, to the south towards the neighborhood. Our plan does not have any docks on any side other than the north. So I think those are two better protections for the neighborhood. And, you know, auto parking being 18 feet further away or 24 feet further away will have virtually no betterment for that neighborhood, in my judgment.
Thank you.
She has another question for the applicant. Could you share location plans and details for rooftop mechanicals? Actually, Commissioner Chandler, I can answer this one. Because the shell of the building, the plans are regarding tenant needs, there are no rooftop mechanical units that have been cited because they don't know where the tenants are going to be at this point. That's why staff is stating that rooftop mechanical units would have to be sited such that they are screened by the parapets or with effective materials as approved by either the Plan Commission or the Community Development Department. They can't be sited until they know where the tenants, what the tenants' needs are. Commissioner Chandler, do you have further questions at this time? Not at this time.
Okay. Commissioner Seipert.
And the question I have still is the stormwater management. I'm concerned because of the residents on the south side of the building, that there's potential drainage that you could have that could end up on their property and give them a potential problem. So I'm just a little concerned. I know you're working on it. You don't have the answer yet, but that's my concern, is the stormwater management and the retention pond that you may have to control that drainage.
Commissioner, we don't have any concerns about stormwater heading in the direction of that residential neighborhood because there's a very large berm there, so the water isn't going to travel uphill over the berm. I do have my civil engineer that can address any stormwater questions here if needed, but the issue that we have not yet resolved has to do with the standards that were in place 21 years ago when the stormwater pond is a regional pond was built. It's over on the far north end of the park in the northwest corner. And so the question is whether the stormwater from the parking lots and the roof and the sidewalks, the impervious area that goes into pipes, whether it would be too much for that pond at the far northwest corner, and how we handle the excess and whether we come up to current requirements. Our current thinking is to try and handle the current requirements, meaning more volume than contemplating handling more volume than that pond was designed for, and doing that on our site in a way that's acceptable to your stormwater engineer, to the city's satisfaction.
I just look at the building size and the so-called periphery ground that you have that can absorb a lot of that moisture is gone now. And it's all blacktop and building, and so where does that water go? And that's a concern that I have.
Yes, sir, I respect that. The water eventually has to go over into the stormwater pond in the northwest corner. We don't have a choice of letting it go somewhere else.
Okay.
Don?
That's it.
Oh, sorry, Fred, I cut you off. I thought you said you were, I thought I heard a thank you out of there. Don?
Okay, I do have a couple questions. First one's for Carrie. On the suggested motion, what would be the difference between a hold as opposed to making the motion with condition number 3, where basically says they have to work with, we have to eventually approve it, and assuming that's being worked with, what we're approving was approved by the engineer?
So the difference is in previous reviews where we have a development that includes stormwater management, we've been informed by the engineering department that the plans are far enough along to the point where they feel comfortable that they will work and can be approved with some minor modifications. We're not there yet. So staff is not comfortable moving forward until those stormwater concerns have been addressed, until those plans have gotten to the point where it is satisfactory to meet those requirements with maybe some minor modifications. So the hold would allow for those conversations to continue to the point where both parties are in agreement on what the requirements are and what the plans will be, so that we can bring it to the Plan Commission for final approval. Without having that confidence by the stormwater engineer, that's why staff is recommending either a hold, or if you want to proceed, you know, we're just not comfortable with the plans as they are presented at this point. Until we get notification from him that these plans can be approved, you know, there are conditions of approval that are presented in a suggested motion, but we are recommending a hold.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what the other commissioners think about this. I always kind of lean towards our staff who have serious concerns, and right now I am leaning that way on this issue. My other question about the parking. Would we make a variance on this rule about the outside lane, or is this something you're talking about changing permanently?
The Plan Commission doesn't issue variances.
Okay.
So it's an interpretation of the ordinance language that we have here.
Understood.
So it's not even a modification request at this point. It's really a Plan Commission interpretation as to whether or not this PUD, as worded, needs to be amended to allow for this plan to move forward. The one thing that I will say is this does show that continuation of the parking that the general development plan did not anticipate, that row of parking continuing to the west. So we would have to have some pretty substantial screening materials there to ensure that the residences aren't affected by headlights that are coming down from those vehicles that are turning, such that, the angles may not be exact to affect those properties, but it is still a concern that we have a street with residential properties that are coming right off the edge there. So have to make sure that those parking stalls, if they're allowed to remain there, are not negatively impacting those existing residences. Again, it's an interpretation that the code of the PUD that the Plan Commission needs to make a determination on.
So if they were to push this lane to the outside, does this in effect eliminate all those parking spots, or is there a new configuration? To me, I don't see how there could be a new configuration. I think you're eliminating all those spots.
That would be up to the applicant to propose.
Yeah, I mean, just with non-engineer, it seems impractical, but now I'm looking at it from a practical standpoint. I do agree that, having parking spaces would be attractive to the type of tenants they have. So I would be open to some kind of interpretation to make it happen.
And I think that's kind of the conflict here. I don't think anybody is making a suggestion that the parking needs for the tenant spaces should be eliminated or somehow disregarded. I think the issue is we have a conflict within this PUD. Is it enough that if we let it remain, we suddenly have something that, you have this conflict between a site plan and requirements? Can this be redesigned such that it meets those requirements of the PUD, or should the PUD be amended to reflect what is being proposed?
Okay, no further questions.
Chris?
I kind of agree with staff on the stormwater and the other commissioners. I have concerns there. However, I do appreciate the fact that the plan that was brought forward has the loading docks on the north side and parking for the cars on the south side. I feel that lastly that the building may actually, once it's all built, but may be also a sound barrier of sorts for the neighborhood. So I think it could be a win, but I just there's a few things that I'm not comfortable with moving forward on it.
Chris? Greg?
So I'll start out with the windows. I don't know if anybody's touched on the windows yet. I guess I don't have a whole lot of concern on the far west side against the freeway. I would support staff in the windows, especially around the entrance on the southeast corner, I believe that is in the picture, where there are real windows and then some painted windows around that main entrance. As far as the drive aisle and the parking, when that was brought up, my immediate thought was, is there an effect, I think Carrie brought it up, an effect on the neighborhood with cars pulling in throughout the evening into those spots and headlights going into homes in the backyard. I don't know how full or how high that berm is, and that may not even be an issue. If that's the case, I'm fine revisiting that and seeing what the option could be. As far as the stormwater issue, I mean, I would support staff's decision on that as well. So.
Alderman Lorik, with regard to the windows, what we are proposing is consistent with all the other developments that have recently come forward, particularly when it comes to an example is Frontline. What we required was the tenant spaces to mirror each other, even along the freeway. Now, recognizing the building may not be entirely visible from the freeway, we still have building design standards. And this would be consistent, the staff's recommendations would be consistent with those recent approvals. With regard to the Crothall development, that's a building that was previously approved. That building is for a single tenant. And while I can't speak to the exact conditions that were surrounding the review of that particular building because that's before my time, I can say that that's not something that staff would be recommending in the future. Amazon, again, that was a specific special request for a modification with regard to the interior of the building for a specific tenant, and that had to do with operations. So consistent with things like the Frontline development, with other multi-tenant industrial developments, with the Milwaukee Yard, for example, we do have window requirements that we have incorporated into those reviews and approvals. This is something that we are striving with in terms of the design for these buildings to look more like a business park. So it has that aesthetic, that feel of having kind of like corporate headquarters, even though we recognize that the operations may not be headquarters themselves. So the tenant spaces are some things that we are very concerned with. We have required in other instances, for example, for those specific design elements to be wrapped around the corners of the building. We're simply applying that exact same concept here so that the tenant entrances, the tenant spaces, the locations where they're most likely to have the office spaces incorporates those windows. And it's not just for the aesthetics for people who are driving past, it's also for the employees, and the office space needs to allow some natural light in those areas as well. Finally, it is a requirement in the PUD. In fact, in one of these subsections, it does say, windows, awnings, and arcades must be an integral part of the facade abutting a public street. This provision applies to building facades abutting South 13th Street, I-94, and the main interior private street. So it is a requirement per the PUD that these elements be incorporated as well. If that's something that the Plan Commission wishes to adjust as part of a PUD amendment, that can be something that we discuss as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Dawn.
Those were all my notes about all those questions about the windows. So no, it's been answered.
Okay. Matt, say best for last there.
Okay. As far as the stormwater, Mr. Faber and his staff have been working with Phil. Last conversation I had at 3 o'clock, Phil was still not comfortable at this point because we haven't reached that comfortable, I guess, feeling of being able to make sure that it meets one or the other. And I guess that's the problem is the confusion through our conversations have been, either you meet the new ordinance of Chapter 13 or you meet the parameters that were given under the stormwater management that was approved at the time, which I believe was in 2000 or 2002, prior to Chapter 13. So there's some confusion there on how it's going to be handled. We're still not 100% comfortable with it. So at this point, I don't feel comfortable moving forward until we get to that point where, we're satisfied that we're going to meet that. And there's been a number of conversations and they continue to happen. I just hear bits and pieces, but at this point, as far as the drive aisle and the windows, clearly they're in conflict of the PUD, and my interpretation, my understanding is that we would have to amend that if we wanted to move forward with this site plan and building layout simply because of the differences there. Do I have heartburn over the aisle? No. I think I've been on this site. It's very well vegetated. It's very mature, that berm. So and they're evergreen, so they're not going to be losing leaves or anything like that. So I see the differences there that Mr. Faber has as far as allowing that or not. As far as the windows, look at what we've approved. Like Carrie said, Frontline, Trunk Country, we just turned back, if you remember, last week based on not being able to meet their needs and standards for windows and facades and canopies facing the interstate. So we should be consistent with our approach.
Right.
That's what I have. Thank you.
Thanks for the input, Matt. Before I go, I guess, question, Assistant Chief Havey, just to beat a dead horse here, but that aisle with the parking, what's Fire's, are you familiar with it? Do you need a drawing of it?
Assistant Chief Mike Havey, Fire, good evening. I've seen the drawing, reviewed it. So that area will match what our needs are for width. So the 20-foot clearance that the access we'll have with our fire department apparatus. At this point, we don't have a significant concern with the access to the building, with the parking or with the semi parking. So at this point, no issues or concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Commissioner Chandler has a question for the applicant regarding whether or not an existing monument sign would remain or if a proposed monument sign is included in the plans. More of a clarification question.
Commissioner Chandler, my answer is that the site plan shows a proposed new monument sign that would identify the building. The existing signage identifies the business park, and we did not intend to modify that.
Thank you.
Okay. For what it's worth, I'll just add my 2 cents. Mr. Faber, I mean, I think we're not far away from where we got to be, obviously. But we do have to be consistent, particularly if the staff isn't happy with stormwater as of yet. I'm going to respect that and go with that. As far as the painted windows go, I agree completely with Carrie on that one. Croft Hill was kind of before our time, and what Commissioner Sullivan said, we got to keep some consistency there at the tenant spaces. The rest, I totally understand. You're correct. Amazon was that way, and we even went round and round with that, but it was just such a unicorn, so to speak, that it kind of went. But again, some of them, I get it, but near those entrances and the whole thing, I would support having the glass in there. The drive aisle, everybody's on that. I'm right along with Commissioner Sullivan. I don't have a lot of problems with that drive aisle being in the middle and preserving them spots. I think that berm, I mean, even Mrs. Sarah said it's a nice berm. It's there. I mean, your reputation, you've done good work without a doubt. I think we're probably pretty good there. We just got to work through that. And it is a conflict. When we put this together, we had no idea this would be the building, without a doubt. So I like the flexibility that it can be more manufacturing, logistically speaking. And just for the record, yes, all the truck traffic, as Mrs. Sarah asked, come in on the north side, and basically it's kind of like a sound wall. It's not perfect, but as she stated, there was always going to be some development there. So I think it's a well thought out plan, all in all. Mr. Faber.
Just 2 comments, Mr. Mayor. On the windows at tenant entrances, it is our fondest hope that it becomes a single tenant building. We've designed it with more architectural interest around it than many of the other buildings in our vicinity, including Crothall and the Amazon building. Our existing building right next door that faces the freeway was designed with 3 entrances, including a center entrance, as this one has. But that building has ended up with only 2 tenants throughout the course of its 17-year life so far. So we like to design in some flexibility, but if we end up with a single tenant, the actual functional interior, much like Amazon asked of you, on their upper 3 floors, it's all robots and the light can bother the robots. But their first floor is the vast majority of their 2,300 current employees, but there's no windows. And that could end up being our situation with a single tenant or tenants. Many industrial tenants prefer no windows at ground level in their warehouse space.
I get it, and that kind of backs up my logic in it. With Amazon, we knew who the tenant was, and we knew it was a single user. This is why it's so great when you guys have users lined up. It makes it so much easier to make these choices. But I know we don't live in a perfect world. Again, I think we can work with staff, continue to work with staff. But, I always say, let's try to maintain consistency as best we can, because the next guy through, wherever he is in Oak Creek, will say, well, they painted it on there, so let's paint it on here, and so on and so forth. So we do have the stuff in place, and staff works off those, so I'd like to remain consistent with it. But continue to work with them, and I understand. I do get it. In most cases, nobody knows the difference. It's a building, and they look and they go by, and they either like it, or in most cases, it's in their neighborhood and they don't like it. So,
well, to Carrie's point, the reason we have designed it that way and even showed it on the drawings, you're making me think I shouldn't have shown them on the drawings. It's because we're trying to be flexible and have them structurally created that way, so that if we do end up with office space with the employees needing windows, it's already designed to be able to pop them in.
No, and I appreciate that. I mean, the transparency is absolutely great. And again, it's my wish that, you do have that tenant and that building is fully rented. But continue to work with staff and get their input. I think we'll get where we need to be with it. So that's my input. Does anybody have anything else? Anyone to my left? Doesn't look like it. Hey, I want to thank you all for your input. This was really interesting night with the ball field in this one. So very good job, everybody. Commissioner Chandler, anything else before we ask for a motion?
She indicates no.
Okay. With that, I will ask for a motion on our last one, which is 6E, please.
Guzikowski makes a motion that we hold item 6E. Do we want to put a date on here, or just until a future date, a future meeting? Until a future meeting.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, starting with Don this time.
O'Donnell, aye.
Fred.
Oh, Seifert, aye. I'm sorry. I was thinking
That's
going
okay.
the other way.
Throwing you curveballs these days.
Chandler, aye. And just to clarify that the motion is to hold the item.
Correct.
Yes.
Sullivan, aye.
Real aye.
Clark, aye. David, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
I want to thank you, Mr. Faber. We'll get there.
Thanks. I
Do appreciate it.
I hope so. It's just for your knowledge, we've had these plans into the staff for about 10 months. So
Yeah, I know.
It's getting long.
Something, and speaking of staff, I do want to thank them. We are busy here in Oak Creek.
Yes.
And they're working their
I know.
tails off, but they do a good job, and they do get there.
Absolutely, they
I
do.
have faith. We will get there.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Carrie.
Before we adjourn, I do want to thank staff, IT, great job under trying circumstances with technical difficulties. Police Chief Havey, go ahead, take off, you're done. Thank you for coming in. And then again, engineering, there was a lot to cover here, not only for engineering, but Carrie and her staff as well. So good job on all. So with that, look for a motion to adjourn.
Grillo moves to adjourn at 8:09.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, starting with Fred.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye. My computer wasn't working with me.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo aye.
Clark, aye. Gavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
O'Donnell, aye.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. We
We're
will
off a little bit on
see you in
the
2
time
weeks.
tonight.